Using type 1, type 2 report as audit evidence to support the user entity's auditor's understanding of design and implementation of controls at SO. The user entity auditor should satisfy himself as regards the service organization's auditor's professional competence, whether or not the standards on auditing have been used, adequacy of the standards under which the report has been issued by the service organization auditor. Evaluate if the description and design of controls at the service organization is at a date or for a period, and whether that period that has been covered by the service organization auditor is appropriate for the user entity audit. Sufficient and appropriate audit evidence provided by the report or not for understanding the user entity's internal controls relevant to the audit. So this is the evaluation that the user entity auditor has to do as far as for the report that has been issued by the service organization auditor. He also has to determine what are the complementary user entity controls identified by the service organization that are relevant. It's important to understand what are these complementary user entity controls. So basically, when a company, sends, there are certain transactions, class of transactions which are being processed at a service entity. Okay, it's not that all of the controls then reside at the service organization. The output from the service organization, there should be controls around validating the outputs received from the service organization at the user entity. These are complementary user entity controls that should be identified by the service organization and should be tested by the user entity auditor to get comfort around the activities, the inputs, the outputs, etc. received from the service organization. If yes, understand if user entity has designed and implemented these controls. What are some of the practical issues that one needs to deal with when applying SA 402? The first one is really, does the service auditor's report cover the correct period? I think this is critical because the user entity auditor has to ensure that the service organization's auditor's report, whether a type 1 or a type 2, is commenting upon controls that are within the period which are covered by the user entity auditor. So really obtain evidence over the operating effectiveness of controls which covers the whole audit. Perform an assessment of the gap between the service auditor's report date and period end and perform additional procedures. A bridging letter is provided by the service organization directly, and it's a form of inquiry regarding changes to control or processes between the date of the service auditor's report and the date of the letter. The period of gap in bridging letters should not be 4 months. So let's say for an example, there is a service organization which has issued a the auditor has issued a type 2 report through till December of 18. The user entity is has a year end which is March of 19. While December 18, the report is covering a fair period of the March 19 year end, a bridging letter would be required for the period Jan to March 19. This bridging letter should not be for a period more than 4 months. Factors to consider to determine whether the time gap is sufficient. What is the length of the gap? The significance of the activities of the service organization, whether there are any errors that have been identified in the processing of transactions by the service organization, the nature and significance of any changes in the service organization's control identified by management, and the significance of the assessed risk of material. If the service auditor's report is wholly outside of this period, the user entity auditor will be unable to rely upon such tests for them to conclude that the user entity's controls are operating effectively, since they will not provide current audit period evidence of the effectiveness. From a reporting perspective, um, the audit report of the user entity will be a modified opinion if the user entity auditor is unable to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence regarding the services of the service organization relevant to the audit of the user entity's financial, or he is unable to get an understanding of the operating effectiveness of the controls, or he has been prevented, or if it's a scope limitation where he was unable to gain access to the service organization to perform his own procedures in the event of a type 1 or a type 2 report not being available. In the case of unmodified opinion, uh, the user entity auditor does not refer to the work done by the service organization auditor unless it is required by laws and regulations. Um, Again, in the event the modified opinion is a result of the modified opinion of the service organization's auditor's report, okay, he would not be precluded from referring to that in his own report of the user entity. As far as fraud and non-compliance at the service organization is concerned, he's required to make inquiries of the user entity management if the service organization has reported a fraud, non-compliance with laws and regulations, are there any uncorrected statements affecting the financial statement of the user entity. He would need to evaluate the nature, timing, and extent of further audit procedures, his conclusions reached, and any impact on the audit. Thank you.